welcome to Gearist TV. On this episode of Gearist TV, we're going to talk about the EnergyNR from Newton Running, also known as the EnergyNR. Since the introduction of the Sir Isaac by Newton in 2009, Newton Running fans and people that wanted to be running in Newton Running shoes have been kind of at a loss for a shoe that was just a step in and go shoe. And with the EnergyNR, that is part of what Newton hoped to address. The 5 lug setup, traditionally on Newton Running performance line models, which have been all the case up until now, they've all had only 4 lugs, with the exception of the MV squared and now the MV3, which has just recently launched itself. The MV squared has a 5 lug setup, just as the MV3 does, and that was brought over into the EnergyNR as well. Traditional Newton Running lugs, they sit on top of a rubber membrane. So if the ground is here, these are the 4 lugs. There's a rubber membrane that sits on top like so, which allows the lugs to kind of go up inside of a hollow chamber that sits above the lugs. And then when the foot lifts off the ground, that energy is then dispersed back into the ground and fires off, basically meaning to mimic the way that your metatarsals work in a bare foot when landing on a flat solid surface. When the MV squared came out, it came out with a 5 lug setup, and in addition to that, it came out with a second generation of the action-reaction technology, which is Newton's trademark term for the technology on the shoes. That second generation technology, rather than having the hollow chamber above the lugs, this time it had a highly resilient, or super bouncy for lack of a better word, polyurethane foam filled in there. So when the lugs would depress into that chamber, it was the foam creating the bounce back or the spring rather than the rubber membrane sitting over top of a hollow chamber. So let's talk about the outsole. Perhaps one of the most noticeable new features of the EnergyNR, or the EnergyNR, is going to be this midfoot plate right here, made out of a blown rubber. And pardon me, these are a little dirty, they've been running quite a bit. This is a blown rubber that actually gives a lot of really great midfoot ground feel. In a lot of traditional Newtons, that was something that was missing because you were grounded on the heel, you were grounded in the forefoot, but your arch was kind of suspended in the air. Now, for those of us that believe that your arch is meant to work, that's not a huge deal. But for a lot of people, they want that full foot ground feel. This plate right here gives a lot of that feel, kind of similar to a Kinvara. You feel the shoe front to back touching the ground the entire way. Additionally, it also makes for a really smooth transition if you've got a light proprioceptive or just a heel striking gait. Gives a nice transition from the heel to the forefoot. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, this has a 5 lug setup, which is going to make it more appropriate for lots of people that wanted that stable, that wide stable feel. And it actually also makes it great for going a little bit off-road. It's not a trail shoe, it's not an all-terrain shoe. However, in my experience, it does work well because that wider base gives it a much more stable feel on kind of edgy terrain. So now we're going to talk about the midsole. That's this part right here. Now, the first thing that I'll mention is that this shoe, the shoe that I have, is a prototype model. It is not the final production model, and I have been told that there's been a little bit of density or softness change and the production model since I have the prototype again. The midsole is made out of traditional EVA foam. The big part that you're going to notice is that it is going to be, even in the production model from what I understand, still softer than what a lot of Newton runners are used to. Now, that's not a huge deal, but it will certainly dampen that ground feel to a certain degree, not a ton, but it's going to take away from that ground feel just a tiny bit. The drop height in the Newton EnergyNR is 6 millimeters with the sock liner in. Now, when you take the sock liner out, it goes down to a more Newton-esque 2 to 3 millimeters, but in its form, when you get it out of the box with that sock liner in, it's a 6 millimeter drop, which, as I mentioned in the last review about the Cloud Runner, that's kind of the borderline. That's the line of demarcation between what's considered a natural drop running shoe and getting to be a non-natural drop running shoe. So that's something that there is a lot of debate about, but 6 millimeters and below tends to be kind of that breaking point. Now let's talk about the upper. The upper of this shoe is a departure from Newton running shoes that you may have been used to in the past. It uses a really highly breathable foam, but it's not quite in that open honeycomb array that it usually is. It's a nice upper. It breathes quite well, though it does run, in my experience, a tad bit hot when it's really, really hot outside. Not terribly, just a little bit more than the really, really open mesh of, say, the Newton running Distance and the like. The heel counter is certainly there, but it's not really overwhelming. It's definitely rigid enough to give you a little bit of stability, which complements the wide base in the forefoot here, but it's not overly stiff, so it's not going to be something that's not going to allow your foot to function as it might want to and to move with the foot. I would recommend going with the current size that you wear. I, for instance, wear an 11. I went with an 11 in the shoe. It's very comfortable for me. It's doesn't fit snug or anything like that. What you will notice is that there is a very nice hug of the foot. It's not tight by any means, but it does give a nice, really kind of solid hug that you're going to really feel kind of secure in the shoe. If you're looking for a little more volume, what I would suggest is indeed removing that sock liner, as I mentioned earlier. It's a nice way to give yourself a little more top to bottom volume and actually increase the size front to back just a hair. Let's talk about the ride of the shoe. If you're someone who's been wearing Newton running shoes a lot, then what you're going to notice is that this is an entirely different feel, even from the MV squared, even though the technology is the same. What I mean by that is that this foam and lug combination, rather than the membrane hollow chamber lug combination, is not going to give you quite the pop that you may be used to. It's still going to have pop and you're still going to really probably enjoy it, but it's going to be a little bit less than you're used to. Additionally, the ride, you're certainly going to feel that full foot contact with the ground, which is nice, though if you find yourself to be a true forefoot runner, it's going to be something that's a little foreign to you by feeling that midfoot plate placed in there. The softness of the midsole did leave my foot feeling a little bit beat up, not a ton, but just a little bit beat up on runs over 10 miles. But again, I have been told that in the production model, it's a little bit firmer than the foam that I have in the midsole here in the prototype, or early production model. So that's definitely something worth trying it on for before you commit, so that you really know whether how it's gonna feel to you. Overall, this shoe is a great shoe if you're looking to go from road to trail and back and get into Newtons in general. For me, if you need a shoe that's going to give you that more lateral stability that you may not have in other Newton running shoes, but you still want the Newton running experience, this is going to be that to a certain degree. If you're a person who's experienced in wearing Newton running shoes, it's going to be a little bit different, as I mentioned earlier, but not a ton, and it's certainly something that you would want to be a companion of yours going on and off-road. I would like to see a slightly firmer midsole on this shoe. Again, the production model, I've been told, is a little bit firmer. But what it left my foot feeling, again, aside from a little bit beat up, I felt like my foot was working a little more than I wanted it to in this shoe. Being an experienced Newton runner, that's something that I was a little bit unaware of, or it was just foreign to me because I'm used to that pop and I'm used to the shoe working with me a little bit more. Not that this doesn't, but relative to, say, the Newton running distance, this is certainly a different ride, and it could have been that my foot was just acclimating itself to the shoe a little bit more. Coming in at $119, the Energy is at the low end of Newton Running's price point. It's certainly something that's going to be very attractive to people because of that. And if you look at the grand scale of how much Newtons generally cost, $175 down to now $119, that is going to be something that is going to be really attractive to people. It's also convenient that if on their website you spend $118.99, then you get free shipping. So this is $119, so spend a penny. For those people that have been really reticent to try Newton running shoes, this is going to be something that they're going to really enjoy getting into. And I will credit 100% of this shoe, 100%, to Danny Abshire. He's done a great job listening to people that wanted a shoe that kind of crosses the barrier between the Newton running performance models and something that didn't exist before, a real step-in model. So kudos to Danny, who is in fact the driving force behind Newton running. So that is the EnergyNR from Newton Running. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Gearist TV. Please visit us at Gearist.com. Check us out on Facebook. Just go to facebook.com/Gearist. And also on Twitter and Instagram at twitter.com/TheGearist and Instagram.com/TheGearist. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Please leave your questions and comments in the comments section below and subscribe to this channel. Thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you on the next one.